Hello, Changemaker.
Welcome to the Innovation Room,
A place for business leaders,
change agents, and change champions.
anyone who wants to know where digital transformation is taking us,
A place that sparks ideas.
and explores what's really possible with software and technology.
Ready?
Let's see what's happening.
The media is full of crisis news: the cost of living crisis, the banking crisis, the housing crisis. We live in a very noisy world today. It's increasingly hard not to be impacted by the mainstream media, the negative narrative of what lies ahead, the status quo. My guest in this episode is a known outlaw in the innovation room, a behavioral economist who is a voice of realistic hope. His insight on the economy back in the summer, which was published in episode 18, A Finger to Recession, was very different to the mainstream analysis, who were predicting long and deep recession. So much has happened between then and now. The government changed, new budget announced, the mainstream media and economic analysis caught up with his views, and of course, ChatGPT was introduced to the world. I thought it's perfect timing to ask him again to join me and hear his thoughts on the next 6 to 12 months. This is Somayeh, CEO of Geeks, and I'm delighted to welcome back Roger Martin-Fagg to the Innovation Room. Thank you so much for joining the Innovation Room, and big welcome back. Do you want to introduce yourself briefly for the audience who might not have listened to your previous podcast, or and they might not know what a wonderful human you are?
Somayeh, you're very kind, and thank you for asking me back. Well, I'm a behavioralist. I'm a behavioralist economist, although I was trained in what most economics people are trained in, which is neoclassical thinking. And one of the problems I have with neoclassical thinking is it may have been relevant in the 30s when it evolved, but it's not really relevant today because a lot of things have changed in the world. So I now focus on what drives interest rates, do they drive investment spending, and how is the economy responding to the avalanche of media and online observations, which are all based on partial data. So my approach is to keep it simple, look at how the world's changed, and look at the fundamental, which is I see the economy as a great big pipe. And in the pipe, I see all these businesses trying to manage flow of revenue, flow of expenses, flow of profit. And what determines that flow is how much money there is available to everybody. So I really focus on money supply as a key forward indicator.
Let's start, Roger. Let's start with the traditional question we have of who would you bring with yourself to the Innovation Room? I know the answer, kind of, like I would like to have, but I know it's not possible. But we say dead or alive, fiction or real. I would want to have a copy of you, a clone of you, and see what the conversation is going to be. But who would you bring?
I think I would bring into the interview. I've already got Brunel, haven't I?
Yes, you had.
Well,
Yeah.
this time I would have Frank Whittle, who developed the jet engine.
Why would you have?
Because of the way in which he took some very, very basic physics and made it work. And I think he could look at some of the issues we have and say, look, let's look at the simple solution to this problem.
Wonderful. So he does what you do to the economy. He did what you do to the economy. Takes the complex and make it simple.
Exactly.
Wonderful. One of the big reasons, and I know you have a huge tribe, I like to call them, as opposed to a huge fan base of people who follow your insights into the economy. And one of the reasons I've been on that tribe for about 4 or 5 years now. is the optimism, the contagious optimism that you spread around, regardless of how things might look differently. You find a way to energize the business leaders to do what they do best. Before we tap into your insight into the recent developments of the economy or where the economy is going, I like to take you back to October 2022 when you were in the innovation room and the insight you brought at the time. So we record an episode and we called it A Finger to Recession. And the reason was everybody at the time, all the big media were talking about there is going to be a recession. It's going to be a global recession and it's going to hit UK very hard and it's going to be horrendous, blah, blah, blah. And you had a very different view and you said it's not going to be a recession. If there is going to be one, it's going to be very shallow and very short. Do you want to explain what happened, why everybody has changed their mind now?
Yeah, I mean, when we were talking last October, it was just after the Truss Kwarteng budget in the UK. And I did say at the time, it was one of the stupidest things I've seen coming out of government, I think, ever. Just to be plain, what that budget said was that the government was going to cut taxes and finance the cuts, the £55 billion worth of cuts, by borrowing from the Bank of England. This is at a time when inflation was already gathering pace. So the budget was going to stimulate an economy that was already overheating. And the financial markets saw it as a massive error of judgment, as a result of which long-run interest rates rose by nearly 3%. And this is why people started talking about a deep recession, because they were saying the housing market will drop by 15%. You know, the whole confidence, not just in the UK, but these interest rate ideas spread across Europe and to America. And my view was that it was a stupid budget, but it wouldn't cause a deep recession because there was still a huge amount of money in the global pipeline that had been created during COVID. And I gave you the figure. During COVID, 17 trillion of new money was created. Now, of course, some of the purchasing power of that money had been eroded by inflation, but the rest of it was still in the global system. The question was, would people spend it? It wasn't a lack of money, it's a lack of willingness of people to spend it. And I think the majority of business owners do not wake up in the morning saying, what can I cut? They wake up in the morning saying, what can I do differently? What can I grow? And luckily, the vast majority of businesses actually had pretty good cash reserves. That is why I thought there might be a psychological reaction to the budget, but not a deep recession. And I'm pleased to say I've so far been correct.
Cool. And what is your current views? Because now the rest of the economists have caught up with what you were saying. So the general consensus is there is not going to be a recession, and if there is, it's going to be really, really short and really shallow. So what's your views for the next 6 to 12 months?
Well, definitely no recession. And I think we are going to see a significant increase in activity from August this year. And the main reason for thinking this is if you look at the data, a year ago, households, particularly middle-class households, were reading that their energy bill could go up by 3 times. And if you look at the data, what they started to do was put money away just in case, because they don't like going into debt. And then in August last year, we saw energy prices going up even more, and the media's full of, oh, next year it's going to be terrible. But the good news is the price of natural gas is now at the same price as it was beginning of 2019, before Putin went into Ukraine. And there's a lag usually of about 6 months before the spot price feeds through into people's bills. So I'm expecting by August, September this year, a lot of people seeing that their energy bill is probably 2,000 or even £2,500 less than they expected. And I think they're going to say, well, that's great. Now, what should we buy? That's why I see in the last 2 quarters of this year a much bigger upturn in activity than the government sees, or indeed mainstream forecasters see.
And you have a very specific view on how to approach the economy development or the changes in the economy. And you're an optimist. What is the reason to be an optimist in this climate, and how being an optimist is changing the way businesses behave? And is it what we see a result of having more negative outlook
Yes,
by majority?
I think you've got to split the British economy into 2 big groups. The first group, which supply about 40% of economic activity, they're the big corporates. They're the big shareholder-driven companies where the average tenure for a chief exec is about 4 years, and they are totally focused on growing their earnings per share. And their finance directors will always be looking at the performance over the next 12 months, whether it will trigger bonuses or not. And these are the companies that since 2016 have seriously cut back investment spending, which is one of the reasons productivity is so poor. But the other 60% of economic activity is produced by owner-managed businesses, SMEs, people who employ less than 200 people. And the characteristic of anyone who starts their own business is they basically look at opportunities many more times than they look at risk. So they are natural optimists. They are energetic forward thinkers. You would never start your own business otherwise. I mean, if you look at it, you've got to be optimistic. You've got to say, I can do this. And if we look at the data, it's they who have been investing in the country. And it is they, thank God, that mean we haven't been in recession. And nor will we.
You mentioned the money from the COVID in October was still there, so people hadn't spent it because they were being cautious. Have they spent it since, or is it still?
They've spent some of it. If you look at households, some of it's gone on 7-star hotels in Dubai and new Defender motor cars. Yeah, I think about 20 billion of it has been spent, but my estimate is that there's still 130 billion sitting in people's accounts. Now, if we look at big corporates, many of them, despite buying back their shares to keep their earnings up, many of them have plenty of cash too. And with the current government showing some abilities and some sense of stability, I think they may well start beginning to invest, which will be another stimulus this year and going into next.
We looked at or when I was reading your report, you're looking at the productivity issues of the UK, which is a long issue for a few years. It's not a new thing. But also we are hearing all the, like I was saying, like all the any list possible of the developed countries. At the moment, UK is at the bottom. So what is your analysis of that, and how can we get out of that bottom? Why we have ended up there, and how do we get
Great.
out?
Yeah, well, we ended up there, I think, for two reasons. The biggest for me is Brexit. I still think it's one of the biggest errors the country's made for 300 years. So that's the first issue. The second issue is our productivity gains are not there because there's been underinvestment and because the population is aging. And when people get older, they tend to be a lot more resistant to change. And for productivity gains, you really do need to re-engineer a business. I mean, I know what your business is in, but your business provides the wherewithal for that re-engineering. And I think there are still too many people who cannot be persuaded that the expenditure is worth it.
They call it investment.
Well, it is an investment, of course. And as a consequence, we do have in Britain a lot of zombie businesses. Businesses that haven't evolved, haven't invested, and they've only survived because money has been virtually free until recently. This year, those businesses, many of them will go, and that will release resources which have not been used productively for businesses that can use them productively. So believe it or not, when we look at the data, I think we'll see 2023, the year at which British productivity began to edge upwards.
Cool. Very cool.
It is cool.
What it is, we like that. The what's the role of government? Because we know they have not done so well this year, to begin with, and they are trying to, make up for it. But what do you think what can they do to make a difference?
Well, the first thing they can do is stop doing stupid things.
Well, that's the government thing, isn't it?
Well, that's really important. The second thing government can do, and I think this is important, is realize the limit of what it can achieve. I mean, government still believes it can control the economy. And government says we're going to produce growth at 2.5%. We're going to produce inflation at 5%. They cannot do that. All they can do through the tax system and regulation is nudge us to behave differently. GDP is not created by governments. There's no such thing as government money. The only money government has is what it either borrows or taxes from its people. So what government must do is the things we ask it to do. Keep us safe, keep us healthy, help us educate the next generation, make sure the infrastructure is fit for purpose. And by that, I include the digital infrastructure. And the fifth thing is to engage with the rest of the world in a positive way to enhance our brand value.
And you mean the British brand value?
Yes. And if they did that consistently, then all the benefits would flow through. But my view is we haven't had that basically since 2016. Because we've had a government that's been fighting with itself. I think we're getting it now. I think it's the last chance saloon. And in the last 6 months, I've been encouraged by the stability from Sunak, the Prime Minister, and his Chancellor Hunt.
It's interesting. We are getting into politics, but it's interesting to see how much you don't hear any news about the government. And it's like, well, it seems that they are working, they are doing their job, as opposed to being a show business and constantly creating dramatic news that would hurt the businesses. I remember the time that every news, I would be like, oh my God, what is it going to do to the businesses when they create such headlines?
Yeah.
So yeah, I agree. The last 6 months has been a bit stable.
Yes, and just a simple example is there has been a different minister for housing every single year. So if you imagine any business where the chief exec changes every year, not a lot's going to get done.
Yeah. You talked about we talked about what the government can do and what the economy looks like. In your report, you talked about there are smaller steps that businesses can take to lead to big changes.
Yeah.
Can you expand on that?
Yes, I there is this view, isn't there, that, and you get this when you get a new chief exec coming into a business and they say, right, we're going to fundamentally change the way this business works. Well, a nice idea, but change is never, ever a step. It's an increment.
Mm-hmm.
And it's something that requires a lot of mindset adjustment. So literally, if you're going to change, I know it's an expression, but pick the low-hanging fruit first, because that will show that the increment is producing value.
Mm-hmm.
And then you get buy-in as people accept, well, I saw the last change and I did well out of it, so I'll accept this next change. And I think because big change is too big for anyone to do, change has to be incremental. Unless you get something like COVID, where, everything changes almost overnight.
Well, that's the crisis. I read another part of your report when you're talking about, I think you were slightly angry when you were writing that paragraph about why people call everything crisis. It's not a crisis. So I think, unless there is a crisis, change should be incremental.
Yes, I was angry. I am angry because of the misuse of the word crisis. The technical definition, crisis, is dangerous, possible collapse. Well, we don't have a housing crisis. We've got a housing supply issue, but it's not a crisis. The NHS is very stressed. It's not a crisis. Food prices are rising. It is a crisis for the bottom 20% of society, but not the 80%. And so it goes on.
So when the budget was released a few weeks back, was anything in the budget that surprised you, or pleasantly or unpleasantly, or you think there is anything that would shift us to behave differently in the budget?
Well, I think that the thing that it didn't surprise me, because I thought they would do it and they had to do it, this 100% investment allowance, which is in place for 3 years, is the biggest tax incentive to change. The government has said, businesses, you invest and you can charge all that investment spend to your corporation tax. So the simple point is, if you invest, you'll pay no tax. Simple. I'd like to have seen them extend that for 5 or 6 years, but 3 years is a good start.
I think that's one of the things that is aligned with my politics of government. Don't try to do the work. They don't when they allow people to invest, or allow businesses to invest with what they think is right to invest in, or what they think they need to invest in, is so much better than tax them and then force the investment in a specific area.
Absolutely agree. I think one of the errors government makes is that they think they know how business operates. They don't. and they think they can make better choices than someone running a business for where the choice and that person's wallet is a direct line. Very different.
Another very interesting event happened between October last time you were in the innovation room and now, and that's the elephant in the room is the new advancements of the AI, the generative AI, the chat GPTs and the likes, and that has taken the world by surprise. Did it take you by surprise?
It did a bit, because one of my clients actually got ChatGPT to write one of my sessions and sent it to me and said, look, this is what ChatGPT thinks. And I would say that 70% of it was good, but 30% of it was significantly misleading. So I'm not one of these individuals who say ChatGPT is going to take over the legal profession or professional services, or even what I do, explaining the economy. It's merely a tool, and it will raise productivity because it will do the internet search for you, but you still need a human being to interpret and synthesize what ChatGPT says. And I think ChatGPT will take out some of the boring preparation work for every activity, which is a great productivity enhancement. But it doesn't substitute for human creativity and ingenuity.
It's an interesting discussion because what, like, as a technologist, what the way I see it is not what it is capable of doing today. It's what we are seeing with the pace it's changing. What is it going to be able to do in 6 months, and then in 12 months, and in 2 years? The pace at which it is changing. Say, for example, if it took iPhone to, or smartphones, to change the way we live and work, it took it 10 years to get there. ChatGPT has already changed the way we do, or for some of us has changed the way we work and live. But I think what is relevant to the business and to the conversation we are having is that productivity problem and the lack of resources that we have, lack of enough humans that we have to work with. And I see that as business leaders, we need to start thinking about, we are having some AI employees. So need to think about them that way. How do we create the right culture for a team that is human and technology blended together? And how do we train people to work with AIs? It's like a whole new level of diversity is introduced to our businesses. And then it becomes a government problem of, how do we tax this? How do we create like that nobody pays? Like, say, for example, if I can do part of what we do, instead of hiring 5 new people, if I can create, I don't know, a new version of the AI integration with ChatGPT to do that work, then the government is not going to get any NI insurance or other forms of tax that they would get. So that becomes a whole different new world of understanding the economy and explaining how it works.
I think you're making some very good points. I think when it comes to the working environment and how do you work hand in hand with AI, we've got home working, hybrid working, so we've got another hybrid working. So it's almost like a triangle, isn't it? You've got in office, at home, and AI. And yeah, that significant change there, but all for the good. When it comes to the tax base, it's a good one. If you look at ChatGPT, all the rest of it, what it does, not immediately, but in time, it creates new wealth.
Mm.
And governments, particularly in the UK, tax wealth pretty lightly, but incomes pretty heavily. So I think what we'll see over the next 10 years is a shift to taxing wealth. And so, if I'm, I don't know, I'm an AI specialist and I build a particularly successful organization and I sell it, then I'll probably be paying a bigger slug of tax than, say, this year. I think that's the way it'll be done.
Interesting. And we talked, I think last time we talked about digital tax and the way that they're trying to behave around or try to understand and regulate the digital income that is coming and is coming from all over, and how do they tax it properly as well.
That is still very, very, very difficult to do, because as we know, in the digital world, you can locate the source in the lowest taxed environment. And that's why there is so much emphasis, well, it's already happened, to get a global minimum rate of corporation tax at 15%. I think there has to be more global cooperation on the digital world. Otherwise, you'll just get a race to the bottom.
Yeah, 100%. I was in a policy jam this morning with the British Computer Society, where they were talking about the topic of should TikTok be banned in the UK, and that conversation. And it was one of the questions raised was, well, should we not try to get China to open up their market to the rest of us as opposed to ban them? So why are we playing their game? Why are we not getting them to open up? And I think these are all the big questions and big topics that would fundamentally change the way the economy works if that kind of change happens. I'm not saying it would happen. I'm not saying China would all of a sudden remove the ban on the Google search and all of other things that they have a ban on. But that's an interesting topic as well that would change the way the world is working.
Sure, I absolutely agree. And while we're on the subject of China, they feel very strongly that their currency should be a reserve currency. But we all know, well, economists say you'll only get reserve currency status if you allow the free movement of money in and out of your country. And I don't think they're ever going to do that, so they'll never get reserve currency status. That's until she drops dead.
Cool, brilliant. We can keep talking. You know how much I enjoy talking to you, Roger, and I think our audience love to hear your point of views on everything. You have a very interesting point of view on the world. Do you want to leave us with a word of advice that what businesses should be focusing on for the next 6 months?
Yeah, over the next 6 months, the thing to focus on is the fundamental that made the business what it is, and the extent to which that fundamental is still totally relevant to the consumer market. Because of this pace of change, I think increasingly the fundamental is less relevant, but people aren't recognizing that. So be very honest with yourself. Are we as a business still as relevant as we were 5 years ago in our current format and what we offer?
So fundamental questions.
Yeah.
Cool, brilliant. And I think that would potentially lead into strategy being updated, which is the topic of the series.
Absolutely. Is your positioning Is your chosen customer group still relevant?
Big question. Big question. Let's leave the audience with that big question, Roger. Thank you so much, as ever, for giving me the time and joining the Innovation Room. And I'll speak to you very soon, I'm sure.
Thank you, Somayeh. I've thoroughly enjoyed it.
Thanks for joining us in the Innovation Room.
We hope it sparks some ideas.
Want to learn more about what we do?
Maybe you could even be our next guest.
And spark some ideas yourself.
Find us at Geeks Limited,
And join us again soon.
because real change never stops.